Welcome back to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, and I'm joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest, and that's Landon Swan, the co-founder at LikeFolio.com. He's joining us for a discussion on athletic wear, basically focusing on FootLocker earnings that come out tomorrow morning, Landon. The stock's had a pretty good run so far this year. It had some weakness into probably September, but over the last month, it's had a nice run heading into these results. What kind of data are you guys seeing at LikeFolio?
So this is fun because how many times have we been on this show talking about FootLocker, and it's always like the impending death of FootLocker because Nike's going direct to consumer and FootLocker's only in the malls and all these problems. And, I think the message was always like, they've got to figure something out. They've got to turn it around. I don't have the answers, but I hope they do. And it's starting to look like they're figuring things out. So that is fantastic for investors. You see the run in the stock. I think that people can kind of see the writing on the wall that FootLocker is not going down without a fight, and they're turning this company around. If you look at some of the moves that they've made at the end of the last quarter, they had about $1.8 billion in cash, and they spent about 1.1 of that on 2 acquisitions of companies that were very focused on digital. And in fact, one of them, WSS, which is I believe that's Warehouse Shoe Sale. That is actually, it's a West Coast retailer. It focuses on Hispanic communities and intentionally avoids malls and is a very strong digital presence. The other one, Atmos, is a Japanese retailer, and they are more of a premium brand, and they are very, very focused on digital. You can see here, if you look at all the FootLocker brands, this is a month-over-month chart. So this is pretty zoomed in. But you can look at just the total number of mentions, the change here. Those 2 acquisitions represent a lot of growth for this company. And at $1.1 billion, it's around 15 or 16% of their market cap. So this is not a small play for FootLocker. This is a pretty large play. Obviously, you can also see Kids FootLocker doing well. Now, the others, don't read too much into the decline of the others. There's a seasonality to footwear, and this is a month-over-month chart. So that November is often down. So it's not like Champs and FootLocker and Lady FootLocker are, headed for zero. It's just a little bit down. But the others are actually going against that seasonality, and they're booming right now. So this was a good acquisition. And we saw yesterday how important digital sales are with Macys and Kohl's. They're both doing extremely well. Again, 2 companies that were, we talked a lot about eventually these companies are going to die. What are they going to do? How are they going to turn it around? But we've seen that digital is the way out. Digital sales for Macy up 19% year over year. Kohl's up 6% year over year. Both stocks doing extremely well. So FootLocker has, is on that same path of, okay, the malls have been our bread and butter, but we've got to switch that to digital, and that's what's happening at FootLocker. You can actually see it in the happiness chart. People talking about using FootLocker and their digital apps. There was a huge surge in the pandemic of people coming in and wanting to use the app because malls were closed. Obviously, if you wanted shoes, you had to go digital, and there was a ton of frustrated users. You can see a huge dip there during the pandemic, March, April, May, where the happiness, that top purple line, dropped significantly. And then it has rebounded basically back to where it was. So, we are talking about very happy customers now. They figured out their digital platform, FootLocker did, and they squashed all the problems that users were having. So they focused where they needed to focus. I don't think they were ready for the pandemic. They weren't ready for that influx of digital orders. A lot of companies we talk about right place, right time. They were not ready. But now they have figured it out, and it's starting to turn around for them. So very positive outlook on FootLocker. We've actually got a positive plus 30 score going into this earnings report. For context, Macys was plus 40, Kohl's was plus 27. So we're seeing a lot of the consumer is back kind of trade, and a lot of it has to do with how well these companies are executing on the digital side.
Landon, you are exactly right. You just touched on exactly what the reality. This story of FootLocker, greatest comeback since Lazarus, right? This company was given up for dead, and we were part of that giving up on them. We were saying, how could they possibly, with Nike going to direct to consumer, how can this company not just have a long goodbye? And here's how you reinvent yourself. right? You become the leader of the sneakerhead community. And that's what they're becoming. This Atmos buy, when you read more into it and find out they're the high premium sneakerhead culture that they bought into. And, you can see they're returning to growth. This is a scary company for several reasons. Number one, it's not very big. It's got a crazy 1.5 beta. It's got a nice dividend yield. It's very attractive on a balance sheet. And now they're growing. They've been able to reinvent themselves into a growth company again. It's one of the great things. But how big is it? I'm really focusing on Atmos. That's the one that really jumped out at me because I think that's their now identity going forward. That's the lane, right? It's like find your lane in the world of sneakers. Atmos is their lane, the high-end premium sneakerhead culture stuff. And the question is, how popular is this and how big can this get in your opinion?
Sure. So, if you think about just the size of the company, Atmos represents about 1/20th of FootLocker right now, and I will take the over on that. Next quarter, it is going up for sure. Atmos has done really well, even just since they announced the acquisition. Mentions have skyrocketed. You can see here when FootLocker announced the acquisition. These are people talking about buying or just mentioning the company and their products, the sneakerhead movement, as it relates to this company, Atmos. You can see it's at all-time highs, and it's surged over the last year or so, over the last 3 months. If you go back a whole year, it's incredible how much it's up, 8x or so. So it is absolutely taking off. This is a very smart buy, and it kind of goes back to the point you talk about how they're attractive on the balance sheet, and people should not underestimate that power of a balance sheet because, again, they had $1 billion sitting in cash, and they decided to put it to work, and they acquired these two companies that are, like you're talking about, possibly the future of reinventing this company. And you're attacking the sneakerhead niche, and you're just going after it, and you're saying, this is how the company is going to change moving forward. We're no longer a mall store where you go and get your Nikes because Nike kind of made that decision for them. And so they take that cash balance that they had, they invested into these companies, and they're going to not only invest in winners, but they're actually going to help these brands win even more. So it's a win-win. So I love the fact that they're reinventing themselves. And I agree. We were talking long goodbye forever. We always said maybe they can do something. Don't know what it's going to be, but maybe they can do something. And I ignored the fact that they had $1.8 billion in cash. That's a lot of money that you can do things with. And if you put it to work, not buying inventory and not buying leases in malls, but actually doing something smart like buying companies, they're going to turn around, and this is the beginning, I think, of what could be the snap that changes FootLocker moving forward. This is exciting.
Yeah, and don't forget, during that pandemic, money was floating left and right to these companies as they kind of had to support operations during the pandemic. So that helped them survive, just like the airlines, just like cruise lines, the hotel industry. Taking out a lot of those loans. But you mentioned these acquisitions, Landon, and I think that's what you're keying on because both of these companies are creative to their revenue generation immediately, and the mass market that Atmos is based in, which is the Far East, is that the pivot point for you when you look at acquisitions that are immediately producing revenue for FootLocker, by investing only $360 million in Atmos, that the addressable market moving forward, now that Nike's kind of pulling away from them, which was, their bread and butter as far as revenue generation, is that what you get most excited about with FootLocker?
I think so. I think it's, it's just them recognizing that there are other markets out there. Atmos is the Far East retailer, as you talked about, more Japanese focused. And WSS is the West Coast. It's more about the Hispanic communities. And so they're reaching out and they're going where people really like these kinds of shoes. There's a sneakerhead community, and it's not just in the U.S. It's not just English speakers in the U.S. So I think it's really smart the way that they're branching out. Very, very clever way to sort of pivot the company. And it's a key pivot that they needed. I mean, we talk about how Nike is moving away and going direct to consumer. Obviously, a smart move for Nike. FootLocker, this is not a surprise to them. They've been discussing ways to get around this problem, and this is fantastic. So I don't know how many more acquisitions they may have in the future, but this does create not only new revenue, but they're going to be able to feed these companies. It's going to be a win-win where FootLocker is going to be able to pump them. It's not, Atmos is not changing into FootLocker. It's going to, and WSS is not changing into FootLocker. Their brands under the parent umbrella, so they're not going to lose their, their street credibility or their brand loyalty by changing the name. They're going to keep it. It's just going to be an umbrella of more companies. So again, love this move, and I think this could be something that changes the company moving forward. Very strong.
Yeah, and Landon, you said what was your earnings rating going into these results tomorrow morning for FootLocker? Are you guys positive on this, right?
Yeah, plus 30 on FootLocker.
Plus 30. You guys did nail the Kohls yesterday when we discussed that also. Apparel, everything is hot right now, and after some weakness that we saw in September for a lot of these stocks, consumer discretionary definitely pulling forward in the market. All right, Landon, great stuff as always from LikeFolio. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.